I'm going to call the meeting of the Operations Committee of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. Today is Thursday, May 6th, and we are meeting via Zoom. And I'm going to take a quick roll, which I know it's very lengthy, but Mr. Irish?
Here.
And Mr. Youssef?
Here.
And we have the superintendent joining us as well. Will we have anyone else joining us this evening?
I don't believe so. I gave folks the night off.
Okay, beautiful. So first and foremost up on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from March 4th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Irish, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Any errors or omissions? Any questions on the meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the meeting minutes from March 4th, please indicate. Okay, passes unanimous with all those present. So the one item that we have on the agenda this evening is to discuss the continuation of the start and end times for the school year of 21-22. Good golly. I'm going to, with that, turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Sarah. So I just wanted to talk through where we are with this, with the Operations Committee. As you know, at the last meeting, we had agreed that we would try to do some surveys and get information from the community, before moving ahead with anything. And, I knew that we weren't going to get that done, that there's just did not have the bandwidth to be able to pull that off. So instead, I went back and I reported internally to school leaders and others that we were going to that we just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to do all that needed to be done. And so sensing their disappointment that we weren't able to do anything, I tried to, as I said to Sarah, sort of split the baby and try to figure out a way to manage this within the constraints of our existing tiers. And so that's how, after working with our transportation department and, talking it through internally, we said, we think we can pull this off. We can get the middle schools moved into that middle tier, and then the elementary schools can be on the two outside tiers. So they're, one set, the early ones would basically keep the schedule that they had during the pandemic, and the late schools would get would be returning to the schedule that they had prior to the pandemic. So my theory in that was that we weren't getting huge changes for either side, and people would be like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of like what we were doing before the pandemic, or that's kind of what we were doing during the pandemic. There was no outreach input or anything along those lines. So it was, just internally looking at what we could pull off. As you probably know, because you've gotten emails, there are folks that are not, not satisfied with that. And that's going to happen, as no matter what our schedule is. So what I wanted to discuss with you today is in the agenda under this item, I have two proposed options. One is the option that we have been, that we had the workshop on, that you received feedback on, which is the sort of the split the difference kind of an approach. It begins to move the middle schools and high schools to a later start time, but it's, it is not everything that people who are advocating for that would want. And it has not been vetted broadly. So people are seeing that for the very first time. Now we are planning to put that into the, into tomorrow's staff and community bulletin with an email address for people to give us their feedback. But that's all the outreach that we've done around it. And then the other option that is on there, and the only reason do you want me to put it
Javier,
on the
1 second. I was going to ask you, can you put it up in case?
All right. The only problem with that is that then when people watch the video, all they see is the screen. They don't, they see that. They don't see the, but I can do that. Hang on.
Maybe we can just do it so to see the times so people can.
Can you see that?
Yes, correct. Thank you.
So those are the two options, right? The first one is what you reviewed before, and Board Member Thompson, Chair Thompson, I actually included what the proposed schedule is for the island schools, which you had requested. And then
we probably just want to add Long to that one as well.
Well, Long's schedule doesn't matter to us, right? Because that's not our school.
Oh, okay. I thought, okay. Even though the part of the, okay. All right.
I mean, it has, they send us their middle school and high school kids. So that's the only time that, that they're affected by our decisions is at the middle school or the high school. Because they have their own elementary school. We actually send, some of our Cliff kids go there for specials. Our Diamond Island kids go and are tuitioned over to Long. But they don't, they're not our school, so we don't include them in our schedule. So
I think Mr. Irish may have do you have a quick question, Mr. Irish?
Just on this note, and Javier, you mentioned it earlier about the emails that a few that we received today happen to be on this point. And I hate to say it again, but you'll forgive my ignorance. I assume, given the history of our relationship, that this is not a new problem and how it's been dealt with historically, because I look at the email and I say, okay, that's a little bit concerning, but
yeah, to put it in perspective, there are, I believe, 12 students from Long that are coming to middle school and high school in Portland. So it's a relatively small number of kids. We have a great relationship. They have a new superintendent coming now, who I know was in Saco before. Have a good relationship with the superintendent who just retired. And, again, over the past 5 years, they've, we started having kids in Diamond Island again, which the district had not had in a long time. And, the best arrangement we were able to work out was to have those kids go over to Long, and they've been super helpful with that, and they've held their tuition for us and so on. So they've been great. But, it's going to be challenging. And before we started, Ms. Thompson and I were having a conversation about the fact that just the schedule that they currently have, that the Casco Bay Lines currently has, the only other option for Long will be if we move them all the way to like 9:45, because their where is
Barry?
Long. The second one leaves at 7:45 and gets here, I think, like 9:20. So that's probably the earliest that we would be able to, I'm sorry, that's not, leaves at 8:40 and arrives in Portland at 9:20 or 9:30 or something like that. So that's the only other option that that we will actually have for them. So that, that they can either be real early or they can be real late. There's no happy in between for them.
No, I appreciate the clarification. I was trying to digest some of the emails, and while you were talking about it, I thought I'd bring it up. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
So this is where it leaves us, either option one, which is the one that we discussed at the board meeting the other day, or option two, which is returning to our prior schedule. So that has us with the middle school starting at 7:45 in the morning, and with the elementary schools at 8:20 and at 9 o'clock. So this does not solve for, I know that you, that you also have received or have, I think maybe he raised it in the board meeting that board member Burke, for example, gave the example of he's got a pre-K child who is not going to the same school as his, his K through 5 student because of the slots. And so this still won't solve that because Talbot and Rowe are on different schedules. And there are people that will continue to be impacted in that way, but they were before the pandemic, they were, and under all circumstances. It's maybe a little bit better just to the extent that there's not a full hour in between. But, my point is like, this will not solve all problems. And, the one problem that we were really trying to solve for, which was the real early start for middle school and to some extent for high school kids is, we're not solving that at all.
Do you want to open it up for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Youssef or Mr. Irish, do you have questions about what the superintendent has proposed? What your thoughts are?
So, may I?
Yes, please.
Sorry, Youssef, I apologize if I jumped in too early, but I remember historically in the last time we talked about the scheduling and Sarah had mentioned that she probably had some historical documentation on it, and it was quite contentious about building up. And in light of the fact that we haven't received a ton of feedback, I understand tonight's agenda moves us to a first read to the board, the full board. Is there any consideration in between now and then meeting again to address public concerns once this is posted tomorrow, if ideally it's posted tomorrow? Or
say a little bit more. So what would we do?
What were you thinking, Jeff? Mr. Irish, with you talking about?
Well, I'm not seeing a dramatic change. And I understand that you've whittled this down from the original request. Do you anticipate, based on this change, extensive public kickback as proposed in the past?
I really don't know, Jeff. I
guess do you anticipate, because it's a whittled down version from the original, in the event that there's significant public kickback, should we anticipate meeting again before we bring it to the board for first read? And if I'm speaking out of school procedurally,
no,
Sarah, I hope you can.
No, I don't think it's procedurally. I guess I just don't exactly know what we could possibly do. I mean, I think, all I can think of is either we move forward or
Right.
we return to what was, which is, option 2 on your screen. I don't know that we have a third, avenue that we can, but maybe that's just lack of vision on my part, but I don't, I just can't think of anything. Option 1 was my, trying to figure out a little way to get us closer to where we were going, and sort of thinking like, well, it's not that big a change, so maybe it'll just go over fine. And are you laughing at me, Ms. Thompson?
Well, I think you
we
know,
all
if you think something's going to go easily, then you should.
I know.
You should know better.
I know. I should know better. You're right. So
I understand what Mr. Irish is asking, and I'll hold my thoughts till I let Mr. Youssef speak, or for you to complete, Mr. Irish. Are you all set, Mr. Irish?
I am all set. Admittedly, I was absent historically on these conversations. From what I gather, were contentious. So I didn't know whether or not even a slight variation would cause continued ruckus in the community, and I just wanted to bring that up. So,
I think the one thing you have to look at too is it's not slight. The way this is lined up, so the tier 1 is East End on the proposed. The tier 1 down here is middle school. So
yeah,
that's what the little difference is there. I think that when you see, the pre-pandemic was 7:45, and this would move them to 8:20, which is 35 difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't pick up on that at first until I looked at it closer.
No, yeah. Once you have to, instead of looking at the tiers, you have to look at the schools, and it's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Youssef, do you have any questions or thoughts?
No, not right now.
Okay. So I guess I'll give my thoughts. I'm at the school, and the last time we had the operations meeting, I didn't find that we were pushing to do this right away. I didn't get that overwhelming feeling that from this committee that we wanted to make a big push. We wanted to have public engagement on this topic. I appreciate the superintendent, because I think this is the way we should go. But I do anticipate, and maybe in my world, I don't know, maybe it's changed a lot. But I do anticipate once people are informed that we will get significant pushback. And so I'm of the mindset that I would prefer us to do the pre-pandemic schedule and then take this year to move towards the proposed middle school and high school later starts, so that we allow for the conversations to happen more broadly on the operations committee, as well as the engagement. I don't think that we're successful as a district, and we don't set up our superintendent or ourselves up for success when we implement something like this and then put it in for a first read, because I think little by little people are waking up, and once they get that newsletter or what have you of, oh, here's the proposed times, well, geez, and I think what people are concerned about is, one, financially, the rec programs, and us talking to rec, us working with Casco Bay Lines. We had conversations with the general manager there and others prior. And then, of course, the many different facets that were involved last time. So I am of the mindset, even as I was on other topics we've covered this year, that more engagement from the community is better, opposed to just ripping off the Band-Aid and doing something. I don't believe that that's the best approach. That's my opinion. I do want us to move to a later start for the high schools, but I think that with people's work schedules and childcare and so on and so forth, to do it now is even though it seems September's far away, it's really not for people that are making planning. So my support would be for pre-pandemic schedule, with the caveat that we are going to move, whether it be to the proposed one the following year or something even more drastic, but that we have that engagement. And so at least people feel included and feel as though they were able to have a conversation with us, and so on and so forth. So I don't know, Mr. Irish, or I see somebody, I know Roberto has his hands up, so I'm going to just go back to Mr. Youssef or Mr. Irish first before I go to Roberto.
And I think that's kind of where I was tracking, but I didn't know whether or not in between now and, do we have to do a first read as scheduled, or can we push back? Is there enough historically, is there enough time, a month, 2 months before we adjourn, to address public comment on this issue, or is it something that is going to be elevated much higher than
superintendent?
I guess, when we last met, so at our March meeting, where we left it was, it was March and we were already feeling the pressure of being able to get this done. And, you asked me to, see if you can get some feedback from people and see if we can get it on the agenda yet before we end the year. There was no way for me to get that done. And so that's when, instead of doing that, I tried to figure out a sort of a in-between tweak. And the in-between tweak turns out that it's more than an in-between tweak, for a number of people. So I think that there's nothing else that we can do this year. So I think it's either we go ahead and move forward with, what I proposed, or we return to the pre-pandemic schedule and then spend, which is I think what Ms. Thompson is suggesting, spend the rest of the year trying to, not the rest of this year, but next year, trying to get to a place where we can actually move the schedules around.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Rodriguez.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. I'm outdoors and on my phone. That's why I.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. No, I'm still working. Ms. Thompson, I just wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about what you mean or what exactly you envision the community engagement to be like, because I just want to because it sounded like, and I like where you were heading with this, because you said that you agree with or at least that the change of times makes sense. So I hope that you meant that the engagement with the community is more of a, how do we educate the community into why this is important? Because if we fall into the, surveying people and weighing in how people feel, then we start to fall away from the scientific research and the data proving, the reason why we're doing this. So I just want to make sure that our outreach is more of an educational and bringing people along, and make sure that we can help people work with a lot of the problematic issues that'll come up with the scheduling and things like that. So just wanted to just throw that in there. Thank you.
Sure. And just to answer that, Mr. Rodriguez, I am in favor of us moving the schedule and moving to what the data says and the science says. But for me, it is a part education, but also I think that people feel, as you know, from over the years, people are feeling on this particular thing pushed, I think, and a lot of people don't even know. So I think that the information outreach, first and foremost, that we're doing this, because to the superintendent's point, there's only so far we can go one way or the other, and maybe we go even further on the times to an even later high school. But I think that, again, even with the surrounding communities, find out what are they doing. Okay, we've done this part of it. We've talked to rec, and this is what they're aware of. So we can say, okay, check. We've checked all these boxes, so we're confident that we can propose to our community, here's the schedule, and here's why. So that's kind of where my thinking was, because when we start going to individual family schedules, I think that's just not doable. And so I think it's part both, what you were saying, Mr. Rodriguez.
And yeah, and we just do not have the bandwidth this year with everything else that we've been dealing with. I mean, I know I feel like I'm a broken record on this issue, but that's, I think, what our reality is that we just did not have the time and bandwidth to be able to engage in that level of process. And I mean, we've done some research around, how long it takes. And it's a 2-year process, which in my mind, we were starting that process by making this relatively, I don't even want to say it was a relatively small, what felt like a doable move. And then next year, we were going to continue that process to try to get us closer to the like 9:30, 9:45 start times. And, you know, that's where we just did not have the time to be able to do that. But, you know, to I think Mr. Irish's question earlier, we need to make this, whatever it is, whatever our calendar is going to be, we need to make that decision now. So we had a first read, you know, on Tuesday. I'll either come with these two as options for the board, or, which is what I really want to get some feedback from you guys on. So should I bring this as two options, or should I withdraw my option one and just, you know, propose instead our start times return to our pre-pandemic schedule of 7:45, you know, for the middle schools, and then 8:20 and 9 o'clock for the two tiers of elementaries.
Mr. Irish or Mr. Youssef, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Thompson. I think it has been a while when we last discussed this issue, and one of the things that I mentioned at that time was the students who use that time to go to work or to help family members as a daycare, or considering all of these things. But I've been thinking about this fall and the research and the scientific data proof and how students fall back in the pandemic. So I think if, as Superintendent mentioned, we couldn't do this time required feedback, and instead being done internally looking, I think we should go forward with the superintendent proposal and make that decision now, because anyways, we're gonna change a lot of things. This is the best time to change, to implement any change that people will be able to easily get along and get used. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Mr. Irish?
This one I'm kind of torn on, to be honest with you, because as both members have already said, I also agree with the scientific data, and I do think we need to move forward. But I think option two at this point, under the circumstances, probably makes the most sense under reasons for which have already been stated, but also just combining that with just generally adding kids full-time into school in the fall and making just one more change on top of that. I think I would lean more towards option two.
Thank you, Mr. Irish.
I guess my question for both Mr. Irish and Mr. Youssef is, should we, given just the fact that the two of you are in two different places, should we bring both of them and debate those as a school board and make the decision, or should I withdraw? Should I withdraw number one and just say, let's, we haven't done the outreach, we haven't done the deep evaluation of it, and therefore, we know that option two is a known commodity with its, with all of its warts, and that's what my proposal is.
Do either of you want to comment before I do?
Yeah, I can go. I think you shouldn't be withdrawing anything. Just let's discuss and see how things go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Mr. Irish?
Ordinarily, I wouldn't say let's not bring it to the board, because I think it's generally a fair representation of the community. But on something like this, I think it's probably prudent to get a little bit more kickback or feedback, I should say, from those who are necessarily affected after they're informed about the said changes.
Well, we'll have a little bit of that. I mean, I don't know that it's going to be, it's certainly not going to be community forums. It's certainly not going to be, focus groups or,
Right.
But, we will have a little, we'll have whatever feedback from the emails that, that we've been getting, right? And we'll inventory those, and also we're putting it out in tomorrow's community newsletter, and, with a dedicated email address for people to send their comments.
So how would you be putting that out, Superintendent? Are you putting it out as proposed, or this is in front of the school board? Or how would you phrase that? Or how would you present that?
It's proposed and it's in front of the school board, for approval. And before we do that, we just wanted to get, we wanted to inform the community and get people's feedback on it. And as, Henry mentioned, I think before Jeff and Yusuf, before you joined us, that, we've had about 100 people have already viewed the workshop. So word is out, about this, and it will be, there will be even more word out after tonight, and, after it goes out on the email tomorrow. Again, I know that, one of the board members said, I won't support it unless it's been fully vetted in the community. And I will say, it has not been fully vetted in the community, so that's the reality of it. It's not going to get vetted in time for us to make any changes this year, right? So either we go back to pre-pandemic, which has been vetted because it was in place for, a number of years, right? Or we move forward with option one.
So I have a question to you, Superintendent. The next meeting where we have this on the agenda, what is that agenda looking like? And do we have ample time that if we present the two, that we can have, because I foresee this being a healthy conversation, which could go on for a couple hours maybe. And I think we need to allow it if we're going to have two options, that we need to allow board members. My only concern, with that is if we work to present both of them to the board, that we are not saying, well, let's see what 745 might be, or 252 or whatever, that here are the two options and let's talk about them as a board. I think that where the proposed has already come out, and I think, I think we put it out there. I think both of them we put to the board, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of space on the agenda, that we can have this without going until midnight and get burnt, because it's too important for us to rush it along with 10,000 other things on the agenda. So what is that agenda looking like? Bye, have a good night.
Can you hear my dogs panting?
No.
I have to mute myself because they're...
I see the hand raised. I'll call on board member Russell Better after Superintendent.
So the agenda, this and the two big items on the agenda, there is no board focus session scheduled, and the two items are the approval of the discipline policies and this item. And then there's, there will be recognitions and, the normal things. We do have an executive session planned for personnel, for contract negotiations. So that will, whenever we're done with the school board meeting, we will have an executive session. So in other words, there's not a ton of stuff on the agenda, so there would be space for a healthy conversation about this.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Russell Better.
Hi, everybody. I hope it's okay. Oh, now I'm going to have my dog. The dogs. I hope it's okay. I hopped on. I was watching on Facebook, and then
Yes.
I was like watching you guys just have these really understandable back and forth, and I thought I have to ask a question. So I hope it's okay to just try to clarify. And Superintendent, I think what I was trying to figure out in between the whole, what would be the new proposed and then going back to pre-pandemic, I was just trying to clarify, because what I'm hearing from folks is more about that early start, early dismissal for those elementary schools. So I'm just trying to clarify what would, so I guess the difference is between the 7:40 start and the 8:20, right? That's what would be different. So it's that 40 minutes would be the difference, right? That's the only difference for the elementary level, because the 9 to 3:30 would be the same, correct? And then between the proposed and the pre-pandemic, the only difference with the middle school is that like 35 minutes, right? That's what the difference. Oh, middle school and high school, correct? Okay.
That's right.
And I think I just don't have a sense, so I'm sure other members are hearing, you know, what the reaction is to the high school piece, but I guess I'm thinking that what I'm hearing is more about the concern about the early and the dismissing so early. So I guess I'm just saying that out loud to say that that change is, well, that is a 40-minute difference. So I guess that's the piece that I just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly, because when I looked at it quickly, I wasn't.
Yes, you've got it right on.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm just throwing out there that I really understand the desire to move towards some change. And it's interesting because I have a middle schooler starting. So like, I really think the starting a little bit later sounds great. And I'm also really hearing people's concerns about the early. So I guess I'm just advocating for, I don't know where you guys just landed before I hopped on. I know you were talking about, is this a bring back to the board? But I also don't think a long drawn out is a great idea either. But I do think some level of us hammering it out, I guess, is.
I mean, I think that's where I'm landing, that we probably bring both of them back and just have a discussion at the board level. So, you know, with ultimately people, you know, voting for, you know, one of the options over the other one.
Yep, one or the other. Okay, well, that's helpful. And I'm glad I did pop on, because I'm hearing what you're saying, Superintendent, is really that it's one or the other. And it's just, it's not reasonable to think about recreating something else right now, but this is a longer conversation for next year. So yeah, so I guess I'm just advocating for that idea of hashing it out a little bit between the two. So thanks.
Thank you very much. And Superintendent, so we have the first read that's already happened on the middle school, high school later starts, and would this have to be, how would you move this?
I mean, you know, so it's as usual, I didn't do a very good job thinking the procedural piece of this. And so it's actually a little bit messier even, because the resolution or the action, the consideration and action that's in front of the board is to approve the change to the calendar, which there isn't any controversy over, and the proposed start times. And so the proposed start times are the option one. So I think we'll probably, you know, break that apart and do a vote on the schedule, a vote on the start times. I don't expect that anything will happen with the schedule other than people going like, okay, great, you know, done. And then, you know, then, you know, I think in discussing the proposed schedule, I will provide information about the feedback that we've received and say that the alternative to this is option 2, which is returning to the pre-pandemic schedule.
So when you say schedule, you're talking about the paths difference, the 1 day. That's why you brought it back partly. was because of
the calendar. When I'm talking about the calendar, that's what I'm talking about. The fact that we have one.
Maybe we should uncouple it, like you said.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's 2 votes. The first one's easy, and then the second one is going to get complicated because it's where we're going to be, looking at. So the option that's in front of the board is the middle school, high schools moving to that middle tier. So unless I withdrew that and only brought the other one, but if I do that at this point, people on the board are going to say like, well, what happened to what we were, looking at before? So I think
Okay.
it has to go that way.
Okay. So I would say my vote would be to bring both options forward and have the conversation. I just want to make sure that the agenda doesn't get loaded up in the meantime, and that we allow, for this conversation to really happen, and allow, the information to get out, as you said, on the newsletter, and and I don't know if you can add it or not, or if that newsletter is done deal, but stating, when it's coming up to the board, and if public comment, if we could add that people are allowed, if they'd like to comment on this, please, feel free to join us at the beginning of the meeting. So I want to make sure people know when their opportunity is as well to have that conversation. It's not just done in a vacuum with us. So, okay. Board Member Russell Better.
Thank you, Chair. This is a small detail, Superintendent, but I'm just trying to understand, in my mind, the tiers I think I was getting confused because I saw the middle school was in the top, and that's why I was getting confused about the times. So is the tier really about order because that's about like the transportation, or okay, so that's what the tier. I think when I first looked at it, that wasn't clear. So that's what the tiers are about.
Yeah, tiers are, one set of buses going around, and then those buses are done. They move on to tier 2, and then they move on to tier 3.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It's basically a morning shift for our transportation department.
Good question. Thank you very much. Mr. Youssef or Mr. Irish? Do you have anything further at this time? Mr. Irish?
Yeah, just based on the comments from members Rodriguez and Ms. Russell Better, and some of the explanation that's been given, I think I would lean more towards an overall discussion with the board. I think that's probably a fair route. And I do like the suggestion that was just put in the chat box, if the superintendent hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah, and because I'm sharing screen, I don't even know.
Yeah.
Mr. Gioid was saying that he could add the newsletter to the YouTube so that people could see that as well. And if we could post that, obviously, to the website, which I know it's going to happen anyway, but thank you.
You'd have to get that, Henry, we can talk about it offline, but you'd have to get that from Grace and Tess. That's tomorrow's newsletter that's going out. So I don't know that you could put it on there tonight, but you could definitely put it on there tomorrow.
Great. Thank you very much. Good idea, Mr. Keogh. Anything else from anybody, board members that are on the committee first and foremost, Mr. Irish or Mr. Youssef, before we? Okay. And so I think what I'm hearing from all of you is general consensus to bring both options forward. And the superintendent will, when he's bringing them forward or bringing the vote, he'll uncouple it. The vote for the change in the calendar versus the start and end times will be a separate conversation. And then superintendent, would we have to have a motion to change to pre-pandemic versus the other one? Would someone have to bring a motion forward and say, okay, we vote this one down, and then we'd have to introduce the other one? Is that correct procedurally?
Or somebody could offer, an amendment, because we'll start with the one that's in front of the board, which is the later start, and then just offer a offer an amendment to that would be to instead do the pre-pandemic schedule, which could then get voted, could get seconded and voted to replace it. And the answer to that might be no. And then we would take a vote on the other one, and then that one could be voted down, and then we would have to return to the other one.
I just want to make sure too that we're very clear on the communication out to the board members too, that if we can get something out sooner than later and say, here's where this conversation has led us to as a result of the operations committee meeting and further exploration. So that way people can start forming. And if they have, I'd like to put it out too to the board, if people have questions or thoughts, that they send them in to yourself, and we can gather those up and have the information available. I just don't want it to become a all night back and forth, and the debate's always good, but not at midnight. Anything further?
Yeah, I'll get that out in this weekend's communication to the board.
Great, thank you very much. All right, and our next meeting is scheduled for
June 1st.
June 1st.
June 3rd. Sorry.
Oh, June 3rd. Okay, and then we are still scheduled to have July off, as far as I know and hope. That would be great. I think we all need a little break. So our next meeting will be on June 3rd, and we will talk about this at the next board meeting. And I will take a motion for adjournment. Mr. Irish, seconded by Mr. Youssef. All those in favor? Okay, we are adjourned at 6:18. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening. And thank you, Mr. Rodriguez and Ms. Russell-Better, for joining us. Have a great night.
Thank you. Night.
Bye-bye.